Welcome to the Weekly Roar, coming live from the Lion's Den, helping new managers become great leaders and awesome bosses. And now, here's your host, Greg Storch.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Weekly Roar. Thanks for coming back to the Lion's Den for this week's watch party. Today, I'm continuing with my new series called Inevitable Change, Making Pivots in Your Leadership. But before I kick things off, I'm Greg Storch. I'm the founder of Lion Enterprise, a leadership development and coaching business where I focus on helping organizations create winning cultures. I'm a certified professional coach and a certified leadership speaker and trainer. Last week, I discussed one of the pivots I had to make in my own leadership, and it came from several lessons I learned as the leader of my high school cross-country team. But overall, the pivot was all about changing my focus from myself to others. Now, if you weren't able to catch last week's kickoff of Inevitable Change, Making Pivots in Your Leadership, head over to my website at www.lion-enterprise.com and access all of my videos by going to the Lion's Pride Library. The last video for this series is number 73. The Lion's Pride Library is another free resource that just makes it more easy for you to get more of the roar. Okay, we're moving forward in this series, and today I want to talk to you about making yet another pivot in your leadership. If you're a goal-oriented individual, you might want to listen up to see if this is a pivot you might want to make in your own leadership journey. A lot of my leadership development occurred during my time serving in the Navy. I enlisted when I was only 17 years old, and I spent almost 24 years of my life on active duty. One of the things I remember from back in the late 80s and throughout the 90s was really this focus on goal setting. We had classes all the time on it. I remember learning about short-term and long-term goals and what the difference was between the two. I feel like when you're trying to climb the ladder, so to speak, or in my case, it was when I was trying to promote to the next rank, then having short-term and mid-range targets to drive performance was a useful tool. Having goals like that helped me to stay focused on that next thing. I would set a goal, I would work towards it, then I would achieve it, I would celebrate it, and then I would start all over again. But I knew what was next in the Navy, so setting goals was really easy for me. For most of my promotions, I was required to spend a certain amount of time in my current rank before I would be considered for a promotion. So I knew the timeline for the most part. Now I say for the most part because when I was an enlisted sailor, I was actually required to take a Navy-wide advancement exam, and I had to pass the exam with a certain score if I wanted to be promoted after serving the required time in my current rank. Now, passing that exam became, of course, part of my short-term goals. It was kind of a rinse and repeat way of doing better throughout my military career. But I think the problem was that although I was doing better, I wasn't getting better. Let me explain that a little more. Setting goals, at least for me, I felt kept me in a box, this continuous cycle or this endless loop. Set goal, accomplish goal, celebrate the win, and then set my sights on the next thing, the next goal that I needed to accomplish. So When I say it helped me to do better, setting those goals consistently helped me to advance through the military rank structure. But what wasn't happening for me was capitalizing on the lessons I learned along the way from my experiences. I wasn't really growing personally. And I'm going to be honest with you, I had no concept of the importance of personal growth until several years after I retired from the Navy. Through my desire to get better, I sought out the resources that could help me get better. Now, I retired from the Navy back in 2009, and it wasn't until around 2015, 6 years later, that I started yearning to be more and do more. And this is probably the first thing I had to do when I made that pivot from being focused on just setting goals to changing my focus to my personal growth. You know, those promotions in the Navy were all about my external growth as a sailor. All of my achievements, promotions, and successes, as I look back at it through the lens of what I know now, were all externally motivated things. But I got to tell you, once I realized the longer term benefits of focusing on my personal growth, I realized that placing my energy there on my internal growth pretty much addressed any external growth I needed. My dad used to always tell me, Greg, watch your pennies and your dollars will take care of themselves. That was great advice. And if I were to change that to meet my needs today, I would say to my own son, Stephen, focus on your personal growth and your external success will take care of itself. Now, it isn't as easy as just telling yourself, I'm going to make this pivot from focusing on goals to focusing on growth. If you do that, you might be all over the place. I mean, where is it that you want or need to grow? That's really the big question. For those of you who are joining me or watching this video who are already John Maxwell team members, maybe you experienced this overwhelming feeling of wanting to do it all. Now, for those of you who are not John Maxwell team members, the John Maxwell team certifies us as John Maxwell speakers, coaches, and trainers. Well, those three things are quite a bit in and of themselves. And in the beginning, at least for me, I wanted to learn it all. But what was happening was that I couldn't focus on just a few things. I was all over the place. I was trying to follow the curriculum for every lane that they had. So I had to take a step back and I began focusing on becoming a better leader. I started to connect with leaders so I could learn from them and grow as a leader myself. I started reading personal growth and leadership books, and I placed my focus on a few important things instead of everything. So if you want to reach your potential and grow as a leader, identify the few critical things that you need to focus on, your top growth needs. Where do you need to get better? Where do you want to grow? And then start to grow in those areas. Goals and growth are so dynamically different. And although both serve a purpose, goals will paint you into a box where growth will keep you in a nice infinite loop where you just never know where the end is. I remember that when I was first learning how to set and achieve short and long-term goals, one of the things I was told was to make sure you set a date for when you wanted to reach that goal, setting that end state. Short-term goals were, I think, usually like 1 to 3 years, and long-term goals were usually about 5 years out. In retrospect, actually, maybe that was midterm goals, and then long-term goals were like 5 to 10 years. I think the challenge with that was it took my focus away from where it needed to be when I was setting goals. I was thinking about that date. I was always thinking about how long the tasks or even the overall goal would take me. In my mind, there was a finish line, and with goals, there is. And I was trying to reach it as quickly as I could. And then I'd have to start all over again with the next goal. But when I shifted to focusing on my growth, my focus pivoted from how long is it going to take to how far can I get? Now, when we focus on our growth, there is no set timeline. We all know if you're a growth-minded individual already, we already know it's a lifelong journey with really no finish line. And one of the other differences between being focused on goals and being focused on our growth is that the focus changes from what we're getting out of it to what we're becoming by it. I want to make sure that you understand that I'm not saying you have to be either goal-oriented or growth-oriented. This isn't an either-or proposition. We still need to have goals. All I'm saying is that when you can pivot your focus away from the goals and focus more on growth, your goals will happen. It goes back to that saying my dad told me, watch your pennies and your dollars will take care of themselves. Shift your focus to growth and your goals will take care of themselves. Focusing on goals doesn't mean you'll grow in the process, but focusing on your growth ensures both. You'll grow and change, and you will hit your goals along the way on your growth journey. So if you want to pivot from goals to growth, you'll have to work on your mindset. Now, it isn't rocket science, but it definitely takes a change in your mindset to do this, to shift from being focused on just goals to focusing more on your personal growth. So here are a few tips that are going to help you to make the pivot if you feel like maybe you need to make the pivot. You know, a friend of mine posted on Facebook the other day a quote she heard, and it said something along the lines of, if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you. And when I talk about growth, I'm talking about change. If you want to improve, if you want to grow, you have to be ready to accept change, because ready or not, here it comes. When we focus on our growth, we find ourselves migrating away from our comfort zone. The challenges we face make us stretch, and that's where our growth comes from. You aren't going to grow staying right where you're at in your comfort zone. You know that. Another thing is that you have to want to learn new things. Now, if you're closed-minded, if you think you've learned it all, and you think you've learned all you're ever going to learn, then you'll need to pivot to a more growth-oriented mindset. One of the best ways to make that pivot is to not only make growth a priority for you, but become curious. Ask questions that'll teach you new things. You can't just sit idly by and hope you're gonna grow. You have to prepare for it and create the right environment for it. And you can do that by getting curious and asking questions that will help you to grow. Every time I speak about growth, I get this little vision in my head of this new seedling. And it's a great example of our own growth. You know, a seed doesn't just sprout and grow without some intentional actions taking place. Go ask a farmer what they have to do to prepare for their crops to grow. And they'll probably tell you about how they have to prepare the soil properly with nutrients and then plant the seeds correctly. They have to be spaced far enough apart and deep enough into the ground in order to grow. And then they'll tell you that they have to continue working at it by watering the soil and maintaining the environment so the seeds that they planted grow into the crops that they want. So that's the thing. The same with us. We need to be open to learning new things, and we have to create that environment where we can grow. Okay, now I want to mention that dirty little F word. That's right, failure. This is one of the biggest reasons why people have a hard time growing. They can't leave their comfort zone because fear has them paralyzed. And you've heard me say it a million times. Fear is the great paralyzer. You know, people won't take action because they don't want to fail. Failure is just an opportunity to learn. And when we learn, we grow. We have to be willing to acknowledge that, yes, we could fail at what we're attempting to do. But you also got to tell yourself, it's okay to fail. Failure isn't a death sentence. It's a growth sentence. Expect to fail. And when you do, don't allow failure to bully you into retreating into your comfort zone. Find the lesson from the failure and move on. The more you do that, the more you will start taking action to stretch and move out of your comfort zone. And that, my friends, is where growth happens. Okay, another thing that will help you to pivot from goals to growth is to surround yourself with others who are doing the same thing. It wasn't until I actively engaged with others who were on the same journey as me, meaning they were growing too, that my growth started to pick up. I always speak about how important it is to surround ourselves with the right people. Your inner circle really matters. I suggest you take a step back and take a look at who you spend the most time with. Is their influence more positive or negative? Are they growth-minded people too? You have to be close to the fire if you want to stay hot. So be close to others who are growing and you'll grow too. The last thing I want to mention to you that can help you make this pivot is that you got to believe in yourself if you're going to do it. You have to know your value and see value in yourself. Now, why do I say that? Because if you don't see value in yourself, then you can't add value to yourself. And you also won't invest in yourself if you don't feel like you're worth it. You have to see yourself worthy of the investment. How you see yourself, whether you feel like you're worthy of the investment in yourself to grow, will determine how successful you'll be at growing. Whew. Okay, so those were just a few tips for you on hopefully helping you make this pivot to be more focused on growth and not on just goals. So remember, 1, you'll need to be okay with change. Change is a deviation from the norm that helps us to grow. The second thing is get excited about learning new things, and you can do that by becoming more curious and making your own growth a priority. 3, remember the famous quote that we have, nothing to fear but fear itself. Change the way you think and feel about failure and start to see failure as an opportunity to learn and grow. There is a lesson in every failure. 4, we become who we spend the most time with. Don't forget, seek out others who are also growth-minded people. Like attracts like, and their influence on you will help you to stay focused on growth. And 5, know your value. You are worthy of the investment, and you have to believe that. You have to see value in yourself to add value to yourself. And you can add value to yourself by pivoting to a growth mindset. Now, hopefully, those 5 things are going to help you think more about making the pivot to that growth mindset. Now, before I wrap this up, I want to leave you with this last thing regarding that pivot from our focus from goals to growth. You see, when we focus on goals alone, it really trains us to be narrow-minded and short-sighted. We continually strive for these quick wins so we can get this boost of adrenaline. Look, I did it. Woohoo, everybody, pat me on the back. We get that adrenaline going from one win just so we can start all over again on the next goal. And we just keep doing these little start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. But with a growth mindset, our focus becomes much more long-term. We no longer just do better, we become better. We begin to understand that our growth is impacted by what we intentionally do on a daily basis, not just what we do in a day. Intentional actions towards growth creates consistency, and consistency compounds. So remember this one thing when it comes to making this pivot. Our level of success will never exceed our level of personal development. The more we grow, the higher the chances are to reach our potential. All right, everybody, there's another pivot from this new leadership series, Inevitable Change, Making Pivots in Your Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in again, you guys, for this week's Weekly Roar. I appreciate you supporting me this way. And remember, please share out the link to the Weekly Roar video that I'm going to post on the Lion's Den Facebook page after this watch party ends. I don't think the watch party link shows the videos after the watch party ends, so don't share that link out because you won't be able to view it. I'm going to be back here next week in the Lion's Den speaking about another pivot that we can make in our leadership. Next week, I want to talk about making the pivot from being a taker to becoming a giver, and why it's important for leaders to consider this pivot if they want to reach their leadership potential. Leadership isn't about what we get from it. It's all about what we can give with it. All right, everybody, that's it. Until we meet again next week, remember, be powerful, but stay poised just like a lion. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for watching the Weekly Roar live event at lionenterprise.com. If you enjoyed this video, please tell others to join us each week here in the Lion's Den. Thanks again, and see you next week.